Sometimes the heart that sings for the forgotten is the one destiny has been listening to all along. Claire Bennet stood silently beneath the towering gates of Blackwood Keep as cold autumn wind carried golden leaves across the ancient stone courtyard. Her small travel bag contained little more than neatly wrapped healing herbs, a faded blanket, and the quiet hope that somewhere beyond those massive walls she might finally belong. She had already been rejected by the pack, where she was born. They had called her too gentle, too quiet, too ordinary to matter. Those words still echoed inside her mind as she stepped into the castle, where strangers hurried past without noticing the young Omega who had arrived searching for honest work instead of sympathy. The steward carefully examined her letter before offering an apologetic smile. Every servant room inside the castle was already occupied, and every respected position had long since been assigned. Only one place remained available. It was not inside the warm servant quarters or the healer's wing, but beside the old royal wolf stable, where several elderly wolves spent their final seasons under quiet care. Claire thanked him sincerely, without complaint. She had learned long ago that gratitude opened more doors than disappointment ever could. As evening settled across the castle, she carried her belongings toward the weathered stable. The scent of fresh hay mixed gently with pine carried by the cool mountain air. Inside, rows of wooden stalls sheltered magnificent wolves whose strength had faded with age. Some rested peacefully while others barely lifted their heads as she quietly entered. Near the far corner lay an old silver wolf breathing slowly beneath a worn blanket. His once proud eyes appeared tired, yet they still followed every movement with quiet awareness. Claire slowly knelt beside him, replacing his untouched water with fresh water before gently adjusting the blanket around his shoulders. She softly thanked the stable keeper for allowing her to stay before spreading her own blanket across a clean patch of straw only a few feet away. Later that night, long after the lanterns had dimmed and silence settled throughout Blackwood Keep, Claire noticed the elderly wolf growing increasingly restless. His breathing became uneven, and his tired eyes searched the empty darkness as though afraid to face the long night alone. Claire quietly moved closer without expecting anything in return. She rested one gentle hand upon the cool wooden railing separating them and closed her eyes for a brief moment. Then she began to sing. Her voice was soft, warm, and unhurried, carrying an old melody her mother had sung whenever storms frightened the children in their village. The stable gradually filled with peaceful stillness. The restless wolf slowly relaxed as the gentle song echoed beneath the heavy timber beams. One by one the other wolves lifted their heads, listening without fear or confusion. Even the horses standing nearby became perfectly calm, as though every note carried quiet comfort instead of sound alone. Claire continued singing simply because no living creature deserved to feel alone during its hardest night. She never imagined anyone else could hear her. Beyond the stable entrance, hidden within the shadows where moonlight barely reached the stone floor, a tall man wearing a simple dark traveling coat stopped walking the moment the melody reached him. He remained perfectly still, listening in complete silence while watching the rejected Omega sing beside the aging wolf. Claire believed she was alone beneath the stars, unaware that before the night ended the first thread of a destiny greater than anything she had ever dreamed had already begun to quietly weave itself around her song. Morning arrived wrapped in pale silver mist, and Claire Bennet woke before the first castle bell echoed across Blackwood Keep. The stable remained quiet except for the gentle breathing of the royal wolves and the distant rustling of leaves outside the wooden walls. She folded her blanket neatly, gathered fresh water from the stone well, and moved from one enclosure to the next with the same patient care she had offered the night before. Every wolf received clean water, fresh straw, and a few quiet words even if they seemed too tired to respond. When she finally reached the elderly silver wolf, she noticed something that made her pause. His breathing had become steadier. The tension that had clouded his eyes the previous night had softened into calm curiosity. He slowly lifted his head as Claire approached and accepted a small bowl of warm broth mixed with healing herbs. It was only a few careful sips, but it was more than the stable keeper had seen in several days. The older man quietly smiled while pretending to organize nearby supplies. "He has refused food for nearly a week," he said gently. "Perhaps he simply needed someone willing to stay." Claire looked at the aging wolf with quiet humility. "I do not believe I healed him," she answered softly. "I only wanted him to know he was not alone." Throughout the day, she worked without expecting praise, cleaning wooden stalls, carrying heavy bundles of fresh hay, and carefully preparing herbal mixtures for every animal under her care. By evening, her hands ached, but her heart felt lighter than it had in many months. For the first time since leaving her former pack, she felt useful. As darkness slowly settled over the castle once again, Claire returned to the silver wolf's side. He rested peacefully beneath a clean blanket while several younger wolves quietly gathered nearby. She smiled warmly before sitting on the straw floor, folding her hands across her lap, and beginning the same gentle melody she had sung the previous night. Her voice floated softly through the stable, filling every corner with quiet warmth instead of silence. One after another, the wolves relaxed beneath the familiar song, their alert expressions giving way to peaceful stillness. Beyond the stable entrance, hidden once again beneath the deep shadows cast by the old stone walls, the mysterious traveler returned. He wore the same plain dark coat, revealing nothing of his true identity. He did not interrupt the music or step into the lantern light. Instead, he remained perfectly still, listening with thoughtful eyes as the rejected Omega continued singing with no audience in mind. There was no performance in her voice, no desire for recognition, only sincere compassion offered freely to creatures many others had quietly forgotten. When the final note faded into the cool night air, Claire gently wished every wolf peaceful dreams before rising to extinguish the lanterns. She never noticed the stranger quietly placing a fresh basket of medicinal herbs outside the stable door before disappearing into the darkness, without a single sound. The next morning, she found the unexpected gift waiting where no one could have accidentally left it. She looked around the empty courtyard with quiet confusion before offering a grateful smile to whoever had chosen kindness without asking for thanks, never realizing that the unseen listener had already begun returning every dawn, drawn not by duty, but by the extraordinary peace found within the ordinary goodness of her heart. 3 mornings passed before Claire Bennett finally realized the mysterious basket of fresh herbs was not an accident. Every sunrise, another small gift quietly appeared outside the stable door. Some mornings it was medicinal lavender gathered from the eastern hills. Other mornings it was fresh chamomile, clean linen bandages, or polished wooden bowls that made caring for the wolves easier. No note ever accompanied the gifts, and no servant claimed responsibility. Claire simply whispered a grateful thank you to the empty courtyard before placing every item to good use. Her days settled into a peaceful rhythm. Before dawn, she prepared warm broth mixed with healing herbs, checked every enclosure, brushed weathered coats, and spoke softly to each wolf, as though greeting old friends instead of forgotten animals. The elderly silver wolf gradually regained enough strength to stand on his own. His careful steps remained slow, but each new morning he walked a little farther before returning to rest beneath the stable window where sunlight reached the straw. The stable keeper watched with growing amazement. "I have cared for these wolves for nearly 30 years, he admitted one afternoon while repairing a wooden gate. "I have seen medicine help them. I have seen rest help them. But I have never seen simple kindness restore their spirits this way." Claire smiled gently while continuing to brush the silver wolf's thick coat. Perhaps they only needed someone willing to stay long enough to listen. As another evening settled across Blackwood Keep, the familiar melody once again drifted through the quiet stable. Claire never sang loudly. Her voice remained soft enough that every note seemed to blend naturally with the rustling straw, the crackling lantern flame, and the slow breathing of the resting wolves. Something unexpected began happening. Wolves from neighboring enclosures slowly gathered closer each night, until nearly the entire royal pack rested peacefully around her while she sang. Even the younger wolves, usually restless after sunset, quietly settled beside the elderly animals without a single sign of fear or impatience. Hidden beyond the stable entrance, the mysterious traveler continued returning before dawn, and again after sunset whenever his responsibilities allowed. He remained unnoticed beneath the shadows, watching the extraordinary trust growing between the rejected Omega and the royal wolves. There was no command in her voice, no attempt to control them. They simply chose to remain close to her because they felt safe. For the first time in many years, the traveler found himself lingering long after the final song ended, reluctant to leave the peaceful silence she created. One chilly morning, as Claire gathered water from the stone well, she noticed the familiar stranger standing a short distance away beside an ancient oak tree. He wore the same plain traveling coat, his posture calm and respectful. Their eyes met for the first time beneath the pale morning light. "Good morning," Claire greeted warmly, offering the same kind smile she shared with everyone she met. The man returned a quiet nod. "Your song seemed to bring peace to this place," he replied in a gentle voice. Claire looked toward the stable where several wolves calmly watched from the open doorway. "I think the peace was already here," she answered softly. Perhaps someone simply needed to remind them they were never forgotten. The traveler held her gaze for one thoughtful moment before a faint smile appeared across his face. Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the awakening castle, leaving Claire wondering why speaking with a complete stranger somehow felt as familiar and comforting as the quiet melody she carried within her own heart. Another week quietly passed, and the peaceful rhythm inside the royal stable slowly began attracting attention throughout Blackwood Keep. Castle servants whispered about the young Omega, whose evening songs seemed to calm every wolf before nightfall. Stable workers spoke in amazement about the elderly silver wolf, who now walked confidently through the courtyard each morning after everyone had believed his final days were near. Claire Bennet heard every rumor only in passing, yet she never allowed praise or doubt to change the simple routine that had become part of her heart. Before sunrise, she gathered fresh herbs, replaced water buckets, cleaned every enclosure, and greeted each wolf with the same gentle smile. Every evening, she sat beside the silver wolf and quietly sang until the stable settled into peaceful silence. One afternoon, several young servants paused outside the open stable doors, curious to see whether the stories were true. They watched in complete silence as wolves of every age gradually gathered around Claire while she carefully examined an injured paw and softly reassured the frightened animal. None of the wolves displayed fear or hesitation. Instead, they trusted her completely, resting comfortably beside her as though they had known her their entire lives. The visitors exchanged surprised glances before quietly leaving, carrying even more stories back into the castle. Not every voice spoke kindly. A few noble guests dismissed the growing rumors with amused smiles, insisting that an ordinary Omega could never earn the loyalty of the royal wolves through nothing more than gentle songs and patient care. Others suggested the improvements were merely coincidence. Claire never argued with any of them because she believed kindness did not become more valuable simply because someone praised it. The elderly stable keeper noticed her calm response and quietly admired her strength. "Many people spend their lives trying to prove themselves," he told her while repairing a weathered wooden fence. "You simply continue doing what is right." Claire smiled softly, without looking up from the herbs she was preparing. "The wolves do not ask who believes in them," she replied. "They only know who returns every morning." As evening settled once again across the castle, Claire carried a small lantern through the stable, while the familiar silver wolf slowly followed beside her. More wolves than ever gathered near before she even began singing. Their peaceful eyes remained fixed upon her, creating a quiet circle of trust that filled the stable with remarkable stillness. Hidden beyond the doorway, the mysterious traveler watched the scene unfold beneath the soft glow of lantern light. His thoughtful expression revealed growing admiration rather than curiosity. He had spent years watching loyalty purchased through fear or commanded through authority, yet here he witnessed something entirely different. Respect freely given could never be forced. It had to be earned through compassion shown consistently when no reward seemed possible. As Claire finished the final note of her gentle melody, she noticed movement beyond the stable entrance. The quiet stranger stepped into the warm lantern light for the first time instead of remaining hidden beneath the shadows. "Your audience grows larger every evening," he said with a faint smile while looking at the peaceful wolves surrounding her. Claire laughed softly, glancing around at the resting animals. Perhaps they simply enjoy the silence between the songs. The traveler looked at her for a thoughtful moment before answering in a calm voice. Or perhaps they recognize something precious that many people have forgotten how to see. Claire lowered her eyes modestly, uncertain how to respond to words that carried far more meaning than she yet understood. While somewhere beyond the castle walls, the first whispers of change had already begun spreading toward the royal court, carrying with them the story of the rejected Omega, whose quiet voice had somehow won the hearts of the entire royal pack. By the end of the second week, the quiet story growing inside the royal stable could no longer be contained within its weathered wooden walls. Every servant who carried supplies through the courtyard had witnessed the same remarkable sight. The elderly silver wolf, who had once struggled to lift his head, now greeted each sunrise by walking calmly beside Claire Bennet. The younger wolves gathered around her whenever she entered the stable, following her gentle movements with complete trust instead of hesitation. No commands were ever spoken. No rewards were offered. They simply chose to remain close to the one person who had never treated them as forgotten creatures. While many castle workers admired the peaceful transformation, others viewed it with growing suspicion. One influential nobleman, Lord Cedric Ashcombe, dismissed every rumor with open disbelief. He insisted that an ordinary Omega could never influence the royal wolves through kindness alone. The castle has become enchanted by sentimental stories, he declared before several court officials. The wolves are recovering because time has passed, not because of songs. His words quickly spread through the palace corridors until they eventually reached the stable itself. Claire heard the whispers while carrying fresh herbs across the courtyard, but she lowered her eyes and continued walking without responding. She had learned that defending herself rarely changed another person's heart. Quiet consistency often spoke far more clearly than arguments. That evening she prepared the familiar herbal broth before carefully examining each wolf one by one. The elderly silver wolf calmly leaned against her shoulder, while several younger wolves rested peacefully nearby. Claire smiled gently and began humming the melody that had become part of every sunset inside the stable. One after another the wolves settled into comfortable silence, their breathing slow and relaxed beneath the warm lantern light. Outside the stable, several curious servants gathered once again to observe the remarkable scene. Even Lord Cedric, determined to prove the stories exaggerated, stood at a respectful distance with folded arms. He expected disorder. Instead, he found perfect calm. No wolf displayed fear. None fought for attention. Every animal simply rested peacefully around the rejected Omega, whose quiet voice carried through the evening air like a gentle breeze. Hidden among the small crowd stood the mysterious traveler, wearing his familiar dark coat. He noticed Lord Cedric watching with narrowed eyes but said nothing. His attention remained fixed upon Claire, whose kindness never changed whether she believed someone important was watching or not. When the final note faded, the elderly silver wolf slowly approached Claire and gently rested his forehead against hers. A quiet gasp moved through the gathered servants. Even Lord Cedric could not hide his surprise. Such trust could never be demanded. It had to be freely given. Claire simply smiled and stroked the wolf's silver fur without realizing how extraordinary the moment appeared to everyone else. As the crowd quietly dispersed, the mysterious traveler remained behind. "You never answer those who doubt you," he observed after stepping into the lantern light. Claire looked toward the peaceful wolves before speaking softly. "If I spend my days proving people wrong, I will have less time helping those who need me." The traveler studied her thoughtful expression for a long moment before quietly nodding. "Then perhaps the truth will speak for you soon enough." Claire watched him disappear into the darkness once more, never imagining that before another sunrise arrived, voices within the royal court would demand an explanation for the impossible loyalty now shared between the forgotten Omega and the royal wolves, setting into motion a meeting that would change her life forever. The following morning began like every other, with Claire Bennet waking before dawn and quietly carrying fresh herbs across the dew-covered courtyard toward the royal stable. She expected another peaceful day among the wolves, another sunrise filled with familiar routines, and perhaps another brief conversation with the quiet traveler whose kindness remained a mystery. Instead, she found the elderly stable keeper waiting outside with unusual concern written across his face. He removed his cap respectfully before speaking. "The royal court has summoned you immediately." Claire stopped in surprise, her hands tightening gently around the woven basket she carried. "Have I done something wrong?" she asked softly. The old man slowly shook his head. "I do not know. They only said the request came directly from the palace." Claire nodded calmly despite the uncertainty growing inside her heart. Before following the castle messenger, she walked into the stable one final time. Every wolf quietly lifted its head as she entered. The elderly silver wolf approached her at once, gently brushing his shoulder against her arm as though sensing she needed reassurance. Claire smiled warmly and rested her hand against his soft silver fur. "I will return soon," she whispered. "Please take care of one another until I come back." The wolves remained unusually attentive as she slowly left the stable behind. The journey toward the great hall felt far longer than the short distance across the castle grounds. Towering stone walls, colorful stained glass windows, polished marble corridors, and rows of silent royal guards surrounded her, making every step feel heavier than the last. Claire kept her eyes lowered respectfully, reminding herself that honesty required no preparation beyond simply telling the truth. She had nothing to hide because every decision she had made inside the stable had come from compassion alone. The massive doors of the great hall slowly opened before her. Noble advisors, respected healers, royal officers, and distinguished guests stood in orderly rows beneath enormous banners displaying the crest of the royal pack. At the center of the magnificent chamber stood the throne itself. Claire quietly stepped forward until the royal herald announced in a clear voice, "His Majesty, Alpha King Alexander Hawthorne." Her breath caught instantly. The familiar figure seated upon the throne was the same quiet traveler who had listened to her songs before dawn, accepted her greetings with gentle smiles, and disappeared each morning before she could ask his name. Every conversation beside the stable, every thoughtful glance, every unexpected basket of herbs suddenly returned to her with astonishing clarity. Claire immediately lowered her head in respectful surprise. "Your Majesty," she whispered, unable to hide her disbelief. Alexander slowly rose from the throne. Instead of remaining above the assembled court, he calmly descended the marble steps until only a few feet separated them. His expression carried the same quiet warmth she had always known beneath the simple traveling coat. "There is no reason to be afraid, Claire," he said gently. "You have never spoken to me with anything except honesty, and I hope you never will." Soft murmurs spread throughout the great hall as the court watched their Alpha King address the humble Omega with unmistakable kindness. Lord Cedric stood among the gathered nobles, clearly unsettled by the respect shown toward the young healer. Alexander then turned to face the court, his calm voice carrying effortlessly across the silent chamber. "For many mornings I observed this woman without revealing my name. I watched her offer comfort when she believed no reward could ever follow. Today, every person in this hall will understand why the royal wolves chose to trust her long before any of you did." The great hall remained completely silent as Alexander Hawthorne finished speaking. Every noble, advisor, and royal officer stood motionless, waiting to hear what the Alpha King would say next. Claire Bennet kept her eyes lowered, still struggling to understand that the quiet traveler who had listened to her songs before dawn was the ruler of the entire kingdom. Alexander slowly turned toward the assembled court, his calm expression revealing neither anger nor pride. "Many of you have questioned why the royal wolves suddenly changed," he began in a steady voice. "Some believed it was coincidence. Others believed exaggerated stories had clouded our judgment. I chose not to answer because I wanted the truth to reveal itself through patience rather than argument." His gaze rested briefly upon Lord Cedric before returning to the gathering. "For weeks I visited the royal stable before sunrise without announcing who I was. I watched this young Omega when she believed no important eyes could see her. She asked for nothing. She expected nothing. Yet every morning she offered compassion with complete sincerity." Claire slowly lifted her eyes, surprised that he remembered every small moment she had never considered significant. Alexander continued, I saw her give her own blanket to an elderly wolf during the coldest night of autumn. I watched her replace water before she drank herself. I listened as she sang, not because she wished to impress anyone, but because she believed no living creature should face loneliness in silence. Quiet murmurs disappeared completely. Even those who had doubted Claire now listened with thoughtful expressions. Alexander walked one final step toward her before stopping. His voice softened. The royal wolves recognized something many people overlooked. They recognized a heart that served without seeking recognition. Claire felt tears quietly gathering in her eyes, not because she desired praise, but because someone had truly understood the reasons behind every ordinary choice she had made. Then something completely unexpected happened. Before the astonished court could react, Alexander slowly lowered himself onto one knee before the rejected Omega. The sound of his knee touching polished marble echoed gently through the silent chamber. Every noble stared in complete disbelief. No Alpha King had ever knelt before another person during a royal assembly. Alexander raised his eyes to meet Claire's with quiet certainty. Claire Bennett, he said clearly enough for every voice inside the great hall to hear. Long before I revealed my name, destiny revealed your heart. I searched for strength throughout my kingdom and found it singing beside those everyone else had forgotten. Claire stood frozen, unable to speak. Alexander continued with calm conviction. Today I will no longer hide what fate has already placed before me. Before this court, before the royal pack, and before the ancestors who guided our people, I acknowledge you as my fated mate. A collective breath filled the chamber as astonishment spread through every corner of the hall. Lord Cedric lowered his head in speechless disbelief, while the royal advisors exchanged stunned glances. Claire's eyes filled with quiet emotion as she whispered, Your Majesty, I am only an ordinary Omega. Alexander smiled gently without rising. No, he answered softly. You are the woman who reminded an entire kingdom that true greatness begins with kindness when no one is watching. Rank did not choose you. Destiny did. At that very moment, the enormous doors of the great hall slowly opened, and the elderly silver wolf calmly walked inside, followed by the rest of the royal wolves, each one moving peacefully toward Claire before surrounding her in complete trust, leaving every witness with undeniable proof that the choice made by the Alpha King had already been accepted by the heart of the royal pack itself. The days that followed the royal assembly transformed Blackwood Keep in ways no one had imagined. The whispers that had once followed Claire Bennett through the castle corridors disappeared, replaced by quiet respect whenever she passed. Servants who had barely noticed the rejected Omega now greeted her with genuine warmth, not because the Alpha King had honored her, but because they had finally understood the quiet strength she had carried from the very beginning. Claire accepted every kind word with the same gentle smile, refusing to let recognition change the person she had always been. Before dawn, she still rose earlier than anyone else, wrapped her familiar wool cloak around her shoulders, gathered fresh herbs, and walked toward the royal stable where the wolves eagerly waited for her arrival. The elderly silver wolf greeted her every morning by calmly resting his head against her shoulder before leading the younger wolves into the open courtyard beneath the first golden rays of sunlight. Their trust had only grown stronger, and every peaceful moment reminded Claire that compassion had never required a title to matter. Alexander Hawthorne often joined her before the castle awakened. Although he now walked openly beside her instead of hiding within the shadows, he remained the same thoughtful man who had quietly listened to her songs long before revealing his crown. Together they prepared herbal remedies, refreshed water troughs, and watched the royal wolves roam freely through the expanding sanctuary surrounding the stable. Many members of the court quietly observed these mornings from a respectful distance, surprised that their Alpha King considered such ordinary moments worthy of his time. Alexander simply smiled whenever anyone questioned him. A ruler should never forget where genuine strength begins, he answered. It begins wherever kindness is practiced without expectation. Inspired by Claire's example, the castle established a permanent sanctuary dedicated to caring for aging and injured royal wolves. Young healers traveled from neighboring regions to learn not only herbal medicine but also the patience and compassion that had restored trust where fear once existed. Claire welcomed every student with humility, reminding them that healing was never measured only by recovery. Every creature should feel safe before it can truly heal, she often told them. The lesson spread far beyond the stable, gradually influencing the way servants, guards, healers, and even nobles treated one another throughout the kingdom. One quiet evening, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Claire sat beside the elderly silver wolf and softly sang the familiar melody that had comforted him during his darkest night. This time, she did not sing alone. The younger wolves gathered peacefully around her while Alexander stood nearby listening with quiet admiration. When the final note faded into the cool evening air, a chorus of gentle howls rose together beneath the deepening sky, not as cries of loneliness, but as voices filled with peace and belonging. Claire looked toward Alexander with grateful eyes, and he returned a warm smile that needed no words. The rejected Omega, who had once believed she would spend her life forgotten, had become the heart of the royal pack, not through power or ambition, but through unwavering compassion that never asked for recognition. As the first evening stars appeared above Blackwood Keep, the entire sanctuary settled into peaceful silence, and every soul present understood that the greatest bonds are never created by crowns or titles alone, but by countless quiet acts of kindness faithfully offered day after day until they become part of the lives they gently transform. Nearly a year passed yet. Every dawn inside Blackwood Keep still began with the same familiar melody drifting gently through the morning air. Claire Bennet walked across the dew-covered courtyard carrying a woven basket filled with fresh herbs while the first rays of sunlight painted the ancient stone walls with soft gold. Long before the castle awakened, the royal wolves were already waiting beside the stable entrance, their peaceful eyes following every step she took with quiet trust. The elderly silver wolf, who had once seemed ready to leave the world, now stood proudly at the front of the pack, his strong posture becoming a living reminder that compassion often heals what fear cannot. Claire greeted each wolf by name before checking fresh water, preparing herbal remedies, and quietly thanking the young caretakers who now continued the work she had once carried alone. Nothing about her routine reflected the honors she had received. She still believed every morning offered another opportunity to choose kindness before recognition. Alexander Hawthorne often joined her before the first castle bell sounded, leaving royal ceremonies behind for a few peaceful moments beside the woman destiny had chosen long before either of them understood its design. He watched with quiet admiration as Claire paused beside every wolf, every apprentice, and every servant with the same gentle smile that had first captured his attention beneath the stable lanterns. She had never changed because the crown had accepted her. The crown had accepted her because she had never changed. Travelers journeyed from distant kingdoms to witness the remarkable sanctuary where aging royal wolves no longer faced loneliness, but lived surrounded by patience, dignity, and care. Many expected to discover rare healing secrets hidden within ancient books. Instead, they found ordinary mornings filled with simple acts of compassion repeated faithfully day after day. The visitors often left carrying fewer herbal recipes than they expected, yet far greater understanding of what genuine leadership truly looked like. One peaceful spring morning, Claire sat beneath the large oak tree overlooking the sanctuary while the healthy wolves rested comfortably around her. At Alexander's quiet request, she began singing the same gentle melody that had once comforted a frightened silver wolf during a lonely autumn night. The familiar song floated across the fields as warm sunlight reached every corner of Blackwood Keep. One by one, the wolves gently lifted their heads before answering with calm, harmonious voices that blended naturally with her melody. The sound echoed across the valley, not as a cry of sorrow, but as a celebration of belonging. Castle servants paused to listen. Young healers smiled while continuing their work. Even the oldest advisors quietly removed their hats in respectful silence. Alexander looked toward Claire with grateful eyes, understanding that the greatest gift destiny had ever placed within his kingdom had never been extraordinary power or royal authority. It had been one rejected Omega who refused to let rejection define the kindness still living inside her heart. As the final notes slowly faded into the bright morning sky, Claire looked across the peaceful sanctuary where wolves, caretakers, and neighbors stood together without fear or division. She realized that the place she had searched for her entire life had never been built from stone walls or royal titles. It had been created one quiet act of compassion at a time until strangers became family, forgotten lives found hope again, and love quietly fulfilled the promise destiny had been writing from the very first song she offered to a lonely wolf beneath the stars.